Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? If you've been watching my channel for a while, chances are you're even just a little bit interested in video games. But what happens when someone steps away from the hobby? I got the idea for this topic from an email that I received recently from a viewer. I'm just going to read you a lightly edited version of the email because it's probably easier and clearer than me just trying to remember all of it. So here goes. Hey Colin, I'm 32 and used to be an avid gamer up until my late teens. Absolutely loved gaming, had subscriptions to magazines, logged countless hours playing, and ate up any video game news I could get. But something happened and I just stopped playing video games around the time I started university. It wasn't due to studies taking over my spare time, my interest just kind of fell off. Or I should say my interest in actually playing the games fell off. I still enjoy reading the news of upcoming games and systems, but I find that my attention span is gone for actually playing the games themselves. I find myself romanticizing over the idea of playing, but when I turn on the system, I'm unable to hold my attention with it. I've got a couple of theories on why this may be, though I can't really pinpoint if any are the actual culprit. One is that games have become too diverse and complex. They're no longer pick up and play. I'll start a game, but if I don't fully commit to keeping up with playing it, I'll have gotten through the tutorial intro parts, but no longer remember what the complex control schemes are. This puts me off from playing more. Maybe there are games out there that would fit what I'm looking for, or at least what I think I'm looking for, but I find that there's no balance between my more nuanced tastes and the want for that simple, fun, easy-to-play experience. Getting that high score no longer appeals to me, but the games that provide the more mature experience have become too complex. It's almost like learning a musical instrument to control some games, and without full commitment to it, it's not a rewarding experience. In fact, it becomes somewhat frustrating. I'd like an experience that goes beyond just racking up points for the sake of it, while at the same time providing a compelling story without requiring total dedication for a period of time. Maybe I'm just being too picky and chasing after that nostalgic feeling I get when I think about gaming in my youth. I find myself watching a lot of YouTube videos on retro gaming and the latest developments, but that's where my interest ends, and I don't actually play games anymore. You would think that I would just have drifted away from the gaming scene entirely. Have you encountered this type of situation? I wonder how many other viewers are like this because I can't be the only one. Anyway, just a few thoughts. Keep up the good work with your channel. Tim. Well, in some ways, I don't really even need to continue on with the podcast because I think in some ways that letter is kind of self-explanatory, but I did break it down into a few sections and I have some notes on screen in front of me, so I'm going to try and get through this without getting too long-winded about it. First off, no. That is certainly not a unique situation. Tim is certainly not alone. When I read that email, there was some stuff that I was thinking about the way I interact with games as well. I haven't completely given up on games, of course. I mean, it's a kind of a core hallmark of what my channel is about, but I will admit that my backlog for games is longer than I will ever be able to finish. Games keep getting added to this backlog faster than I ever even look at starting to play them. I have a PS Plus subscription, but to be honest, I don't know why I continue to keep it. There are really only a couple of games on there that I would really want to keep long term, and I can just go out and buy them and ultimately save money. So yes, there's still this real attraction that I think a lot of people have towards gaming for various reasons, but it just really isn't as big of a part of their life anymore. I think probably the biggest reason why people kind of fall out of gaming either completely or partially is simply due to time and our major competition for it. You know, all this stuff that wants our time, wants our attention, we have to pick. when we were kids, life was really simple. I'm around the same age as Tim. I grew up in the 80s, born in the early 80s. And gaming was always, a part of my life. I grew up with it, just like other, people in my generation. And, because of the amount of free time that we had, that was a natural go-to, right? It was this really kind of young industry, and it was fun, and it was moving very quickly, and it was very attractive to someone who had a mind for, kind of technology and learning all of these cool new things. And, when you're done with your homework at the end of the day, and after you've gone out and mowed the lawn like your parents yelled at you to do and all of that, well, playing video games makes a lot of sense. But you grow up, and as you grow up, you take on more responsibilities. I mean, I certainly played more video games when I was, say, in elementary school than I did when I was in high school. In fact, I even had my own kind of dark period where I really didn't do anything with video games for a few years. And that was the time period after graduating from college until really just a short period of time before I started this channel in 2014. I dabbled in it here and there, and I'd pick up the odd game here and there. I bought a PS3 when they were still fairly new and that sort of thing. I kept up with the systems, but it wasn't that constant, being into the scene like it was when I was younger. And that's just because, since I graduated from college, I got a full-time job and I got married and I bought a house and all of these other things that people do when they grow up, I guess. So the priorities take over, and you can't just flop down on the couch every day after work and play games for 4 or 5 hours until it's time to go to bed. Some people do that. I don't know how, but it's something that I know I can't, and it sounds like Tim can't, and I think a lot of other people just can't do. There's other stuff we have to keep up with. Games getting more complex. I think that's only natural. I think it only makes sense that games have gotten more complex, and by no means is it a new thing. Technology within the realm of gaming just has continued to get better. Some say we're kind of reaching a plateau. I don't think we've plateaued, but the rate of progress has slowed, certainly, but it's also kind of matched the rate of progress with computing in general, so I guess that's kind of natural. But with that advanced technology, we're able to offer a richer and richer gaming experience, which in general is going to come with some additional complexity. I can understand new games requiring a lot of time and a lot of attention and complex control schemes and all of that, but the first thing that came into my mind when thinking about, well, has it always been that way, was my favorite console game, Mario 64. Original Super Mario Bros. For the NES was easier from a control scheme than Super Mario World for the Super NES. Super Mario World had a couple extra buttons, they had some extra movements that Mario could do, some new mechanics, that sort of stuff. Mario 64 took it a step further. There were even more buttons on the controller. There were even new ways of using the controller with the analog stick and the Z trigger button on the back. And now you also had complex movements that involved multiple presses of buttons or doing certain things in certain order for Mario to do those additional mechanics. And yes, that's still relatively simple compared to the control schemes of some games today. One of my favorite, more modern kind of action games is the whole Mirror's Edge series. And I'll admit that's a complicated game. I'm sure some of you are yelling at the screen right now, dude, you're an idiot. Mirror's Edge is like the simplest controls ever. And I'll admit that Mirror's Edge Catalyst seemed, or at least felt, to have simpler controls than the original version of it. But even then, yeah, newer games are more complex than older ones, and I think that's just the natural evolution of games. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all games have gone that way. The other thing to think about, and it was towards the end of that email that Tim, I think, really hit the nail on the head, was bringing up nostalgia. At some point, I'm going to do a proper podcast episode specifically about nostalgia, like in depth, take a more scientific look at it. I have a lot of research to do about that topic in order to pull an episode like that off. But I can tell you, in general, nostalgia is this incredibly powerful thing within the human mind. Humans are predisposed to forget bad things from the past and remember good things. And I was actually talking with a friend about this a while back, and we both kind of agreed that if we remembered everything, if we remembered the bad things with the same level of vividness and ease of recollection as the good things, the entire human race would become like crazy neurotic or psychopathic or something like that. We would be in a much, much worse place simply because we would always be worrying about what happened previous to us and if it's going to happen again and all of that. Not to say that humans don't learn from mistakes and bad things to, not have them happen again. But, if I remembered every single bad comment that people left in previous episodes, I would never make another YouTube video again, So we have this natural preponderance to remember these good things, to move towards them. But when it comes to nostalgia, specifically, that always goes back towards when we were younger. And that's simply because as we're growing up, our minds are like sponges. We're physically and mentally developing the most when we're young. Particularly, I would say, when you're kind of in between, middle elementary school and end of high school. You have the most impression on you at that time period. You even start getting your preferences in line at that point. There was a study that I read quite a while ago that basically said people tend to prefer music that's the same kind as what they liked when they were a teenager. Once you reach, say, your 20s, you don't usually change your favorite music genres that much after that point. You kind of stick with it. You stick with what you grew up with. And it's also why things like oldies stations on the radio exist. Oldies stations are nostalgia. That's exactly what they are. And so people just get so wrapped up in nostalgia. It's almost like it's a drug. And they'll do almost anything to get another hit of it. They'll do things, they'll buy things just for another moment of remembering something that they had forgotten when they were young that makes them feel good, that lets them remember those so-called good old days. And lots and lots of industries have, of course, picked up on this, taken advantage of it, but the video game industry is starting to get into that now too. Well, I should say it's been getting into it for several years now. The reason for that is because in some ways, those of us in our 30s and maybe early 40s, we're kind of the very first generation to have grown up with video games always being there. When I was growing up, I remember a time when there really wasn't the internet, when we didn't have the internet at home. But I can't remember a time when there wasn't video games. I mean, the NES didn't debut until after I was born, but I don't have any memories prior to that of anything. You don't really remember anything when you were 1 or 2 years old, anything like that. So we're kind of the pioneers into figuring out where is this new hobby, relatively new hobby, going to go in the future as you start hitting these kind of milestones and points in a life cycle. And so that's why I think we've been seeing, obviously a big rise in retro gaming, people seeking out the original consoles and cartridges and discs and accessories and everything from when they were young, the whole flea market madness kind of stuff and going to retro video game shops. But even new products are coming out to capitalize on that. Virtual console titles are huge. Reissues of previous games. The Final Fantasy X remaster was a sign, but the upcoming, as I'm filming this, Final Fantasy VII remake is going to be huge in terms of driving nostalgia. And even things like the NES Classic, which, of course got discontinued, but that was another big push for nostalgia. That's nostalgia in a box. And Nintendo even admitted as such. I'm not going to tell the story again in detail, but Nintendo, when they first released that product, they said, we plan to sell this basically to people who are nostalgic, who stepped away from gaming and maybe want to get back into it. So we still have a long way to go to figure out how this is going to play out over the very long term. This is really kind of the first wave of people getting into retro gaming. Over the last, how long has it been? I don't know, 5-6 years, maybe a little longer. How is this going to cycle through? Are we going to see interest in the original, like the NES and the Master System and the Genesis and the Super NES? Are we going to see the high interest that we have in those now eventually drop down, and then another generation will cycle through and they'll come back up? That still remains to be seen. In terms of practical advice for Tim and other people like him who are seeking out games to play that are going to be up their alley but aren't so complicated, the biggest thing that comes to mind for me right now, and I'm sure you're going to have some ideas, and please help me out with them. Shoot them down in the comments below if you've got some other suggestions. Let's help each other out with this one. But the first thing that came to mind in terms of practical suggestions are going to be indie games. There are so many indie games now, and a lot of them have a simpler mechanic to them. Not to say that they're simple games, but they have a simpler mechanic. And they really tend to fill a hole that the big publishers have left open. The big publishers have kept pushing towards these more and more complex, bigger and bigger titles, the AAA kind of stuff. The indie games have really been the ones to kind of fill in the gaps behind it. Some of them are real quick and simple. Some of them are longer and deeper, but still easier to play, easier to get into, quicker to play. And I even find myself pushing more and more into indie games like that because, they're what I'm interested in now as well. I'm just like Tim. I don't have a ton of time to devote to a AAA title that needs hundreds of hours to complete. Another suggestion, of course, is retro gaming, but not just, going back to the stuff you grew up with. Go back to the stuff you never had when you grew up. If you grew up in a Sega household, go seek out the Nintendo stuff, or vice versa. Go find the stuff that you always wanted but never got. Or try getting into retro gaming in a different way. Get into the modding scene, for example. Go look at some of the clone consoles or fresh ways to play games, like I did that review and build of the PortaPie arcade kit. Stuff like that. Try and take a fresh look or a fresh approach to the stuff that really pushes the buttons you need pushed, but makes it new and keeps you from feeling like you're just going around in circles doing the same thing over and over again, because that's no fun. We always want mental stimulation. We always want to experience new things, but those new things don't necessarily have to be brand new. So anyway, I am, of course, curious as to your thoughts. If you have suggestions for people who are short on time but want to stay into gaming or get back into gaming, leave those down in the comments below. Are you like, Tim, like myself? Are you, maybe at that point where you just don't have time anymore? Have you gotten out of gaming completely? What keeps you in it? other ideas that you may have. Let's keep the conversation going down in the comments. If you liked the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.